Welcome back. I've got journalist Ava Santina and lawyer Nick Freeman with me, and we are getting straight into what we were discussing with Storm just a moment ago. Home Office figures show that the backlog of asylum cases has hit a record high of over 175,000. That's up by 44%. So we're asking a simple question: who's to blame? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need to get your calls in now. Ava, one of the pledges of the Prime Minister's was not only to stop the boats, but to also get the so-called legacy backlog down that relates to claims that have been made before a certain time. But the backlog is growing and growing. Is this a failure of the Home Office?
Yes. I mean, in a simple, I could leave it there, yes. Well, also, you know, last week, Rishi Sunak actually rode back on his Stop the Boats pledge, didn't he? He said that he wasn't actually quite sure he could meet the targets that he'd originally pledged. But look, I mean, with the Home Office, to me, it just sort of reads like managed decline, or maybe even like weaponised incompetence. I don't understand how every other country in the world is able to process people who are seeking asylum, apart from us. It feels like a deliberate attempt to essentially create a group of people that the country can now throw stones at and leverage hate at, and then somehow that will, you know, elect them at the next election. None of it makes sense to me.
Nick, what do you make of it? The list has grown and grown and grown.
All the figures have grown. I certainly don't think that the government are intentionally doing this to try and stir hate against migrants. I don't think that's their intention. I do agree that they're completely incompetent. I mean, the system, the people who've been in the system for more than 6 months has grown by about 50%. And you know, there are a lot of people who are to blame, in my view. I mean, the target must be the criminal gangs, mustn't it? The sophisticated criminal gangs. And, you know, they're under the radar. And why are they under the radar? Why isn't the international agencies, the police forces, dealing with them, taking them out, sorting them out? If you do that, you solve a problem massively. You've still got a huge problem here. The government are incompetent. They can't make their mind up which way to go with it.
Do you think that they're deliberately not?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, here's something. Look, 10 years ago...
But I think they're very incompetent.
OK, well, 10 years ago, though, just 10,000 was the backlog. Just 10,000. And actually, a lot of people are saying, well, actually, the backlog is increasing because more people are coming. That's not quite true, because the backlog was already growing in 2018, and that year, only 299 people came across on small boats. So I guess what I'm asking, and I hope this doesn't sound like two sort of tinfoil hats here, but does it suit the government to have a large backlog? We heard Robert Jenrick, a government minister, about 2 weeks ago saying, well, a large backlog will dissuade people from wanting to come over. If they think I'm going to come over and be stuck in a queue of 175,000 people, I'm not going to bother going.
Completely the opposite, because Sunak's hung his reputation, hasn't he? One of his pledges is, I'm going to reduce this backlog, and he will be judged by the claim that he was going to make. So if he doesn't achieve his objectives, he can't expect the electorate to support him. So I think completely the contrary. One of the problems, of course, is that the law assists the migrants. And I think it's about 7 years from start to finish to the end of the appeal process. So if you get onto our land, you know you're going to be here for 7 years at the moment, which is just a crazy amount of time, and you're going to be supported during that time. So that's a very attractive proposition.
OK.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure on that. I think actually going into the next election, I think he'd like to, you know, Sunak would like to say, we are the party that is going to solve immigration. If this goes to Labour and Starmer, they're going to let anyone in, and there's going to be open borders. So I think, yeah, he is doing it deliberately.
All right, let's find out. You guys disagree whether it's deliberate or not. Linda in Swansea has called in. Good afternoon, Linda. What do you reckon? Who's to blame for this huge increase?
Right, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I'm disgusted with the situation in this country, actually, to be honest. You know, you had a gentleman the other day that on your panel that said we should be in a right where we can actually send them back.
Right.
Right. But it's not happening. We've got, as I've said before on this show, I would have liked to have seen Nigel Farage see this through. Right.
Right.
That's always be what I think. OK. But we're in such a mess. I went out yesterday and our town is inundated. And then we've got people up in Llanelli that are outside with banners and everything else, trying to stop these asylum seekers being put into a beautiful hotel they got down there.
Okay.
It's just literally getting out of hand. And
But then,
frankly,
Linda, let me ask you this. In that case, don't you want the Home Office to process more people? That means that there are going to be fewer people in hotels. I can tell you that almost half the people in hotels come from very few countries: Afghanistan, Eritrea, Iraq and Iran. Now, we know that most of the asylum seekers from those 4 countries, they've got a 98 to 99% of getting their applications accepted. So you're going to let those people in at some point. If you process their applications faster, then perhaps those people can move out of the hotels, reduce the bills, and also go to work, start earning money, pay taxes, contribute to our community. Wouldn't you be for that?
right, what I think is we've got to, at the moment, I don't think we can take any more people here.
Well,
This is my answer to it all. I mean, I know they keep going on about people working. I always think, what's wrong with getting our own people up and working? You know,
okay.
I get really angry over it.
Nick,
At the end of the day, this is our country. This is our country.
Okay, Linda, let Nick...
I think at the moment, one of the largest countries people coming in are from Albania, which is regarded as a safe country. I think.
But we've got our deal with Albania now, and most of the people are going back. And I mean, and let's also make...
Are they going back?
But they're being sent back because we've got to deal with Albania. You wanted to speak to Linda as well?
Well, Linda, I just wanted to know what you meant by the term inundated. What do you mean that Swansea is inundated
We've got
with
too many
who?
people here. Have you ever walked round? I mean, I don't know where you live, but I went out yesterday and I was shocked, absolutely shocked. I felt like a stranger in my own country. I'm not being rude when I say that. I'm not a racist. I'm just getting tired of it, actually.
Well, I'm not quite sure how else that can come across, Linda.
This is our country. Sorry?
I'm not sure how that can come across any other way, to be honest. I don't really know what you mean by our country. What exactly do you mean?
Well, the country is overpopulated. We have a country that's overpopulated. There's a limited number of resources, and it's being stretched and stretched and stretched. And we have to, we've got a health service, and people who have contributed all their lives are not being prioritised because there are demands in the same way that there is in education by people who haven't contributed to the system.
OK, but let's look at the immigration figures from 2022. Most of those people have come from Hong Kong and they've come from Ukraine. There has never been an argument or a debate about whether those people should have come from Ukraine or not. But for some reason, the 40,000 people who have come here from war-torn countries like Afghanistan, that is up for debate, and I don't quite understand that.
No, I agree with you. From war-torn countries, that's absolutely right. But about 44% have come on the small boats. And that we cannot be encouraging that. We need to dissuade people. Apart from the safety aspects, that's not the right way to come onto our shores.
I just don't think
and that's nearly half the number of people coming into this country.
I just sort of think this kind of the rhetoric around deterrent and the action of deterrent is not working. We need to start looking at push factors. We need to start thinking, well, what can we do to war-torn countries to assist in those places? What can we do about climate change that is pushing people to leave their countries? Rather than focusing on let's sort of put a moat up and a big wall, why are people trying to come here in the first place would be a better place to start.
Because it's such an attractive country to come. We give massive... Absolutely. Well, as I say, once you come here, you stay here for 7 years and everything is provided. That's quite an attractive proposition.
That's actually categorically not true. You're given a stipend of about £35 a week and no one is crossing the channel for that tiny little nominal amount of money.
And accommodation and 3 meals a day
but they
and
don't want to be in the hotel. They want to be working. And I know that because I spend a lot of time working with these people who have crossed the channel.
And the ones who are successful can work.
But they're not allowed to. That's the problem.
Well, that
that's because of the Home Office.
Right. OK, I'm going to move on to our next caller. Linda, thank you. Anthony in Manchester. Good afternoon, Anthony. The backlog has increased by 44%. Nick and Ava disagree whether or not the government are purposefully letting that backlog increase. What do you think?
I think really, I'm a bit... When I actually see all the news and the information I've done over the last couple of years, you cannot. You've got to blame the government, and you've also got to look at the side of France as well. I'm all for of humanity and looking after people, and really, but I can't really understand one. It's education being dropped on both sides of the channel and across the world. What is actually going to receive here? You've already mentioned some people are being returned. They come here, they're on very little money. They're being put into hotels. It's not ideal. There's very little future for them. A picture that they've got in their own heads thinking it's going to be marvellous. It's not. Our own people, just in this country, taxpayers, are struggling daily. So they're definitely going to be struggling. But the biggest thing, what really annoys me the most, is the organisation of both sides of the channel. I can see 30-foot dinghies blown up, and I've seen a clip on the on the news where he was all pulled to one side in Dover, and they're collecting them. Obviously, once he was collecting the people. Who are the suppliers of all these dinghies? Surely,
Anthony,
the basic of education can tell you, and a bit of investigation. Who are the suppliers?
Well, Anthony, I mean, we are sending hundreds of millions of pounds now to France to help. They're doing, as far as we know, and as far as they're saying, as much as they can. Although I was listening to an interview of a French official saying that they'd need around 6,000 staff to police the amount of coastline that they have.
About 150 miles of coastline.
Yeah, but again, though, Anthony, if you look at us in regards to the rest of Europe, I think we lie 22nd in the choice of country that people come to. So places like Greece, my home country, Germany, France, Italy, they're taking loads more people than we are. Isn't it just a part of just our responsibility to take some asylum seekers that get to our shores?
I think our first responsibility is to take the asylum seekers who are under threat.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. We've got Hong Kong, we've got Ukraine, these other countries. Let's take the immediate people.
Okay, but what about? But Anthony, you make a good point. The people that are under threat. We know that quite a lot of people who are on those boats that we see daily coming across, risking their lives, are from Afghanistan. If you're in Afghanistan, there was a case of an Afghani pilot recently who couldn't, he never got a response from the relocation system in Afghanistan. He's under threat because he helped our armed forces. He's got no way to come here other than to get onto a small boat. So what do you think we should do with someone like him?
Well, I was definitely saying to you, I'll go back to my first comment where I say about organisation. Yes, it looked very much everybody cut and run and left the people behind who was trying to assist to make a better country for themselves so they can remain in their own country. But what we really got was complete disorganisation. Yeah. We've not kept our promise. We've not kept our support. And we should be looking after all the immediate people first. Okay. Anybody just coming here to make a living or live on in a system where they think they're going to be looked after for
economic migrants. Okay.
But yeah.
All right, Anthony, I'm going to leave it there only because I want to squeeze in one more caller. Robert in Belfast. Robert, good afternoon.
Good morning, Alexis. I'd like to say very, very, very clearly here. You're talking about the high asylum backlog.
Yeah.
Who's to blame? The government's to blame. They should be put back in boats and brought back again. Now, truthfully and honestly, somebody saying that seems very ruthless. I'm a taxi driver, right? I can tell you in Belfast, most of the hotels in Belfast are not open to the public.
Okay, but Robert, you can't do that. You can't put people back on boats and put them back. You're just not allowed to do that.
Excuse me, Alex. What about the problems with the homeless on our streets? They're local people.
But no one is saying... But Robert, I don't think anyone's saying is either or. They're not saying that you either look after asylum seekers or you look after homeless or people who need government help. The idea is that you should be able to help both.
Well, I'm going to tell you, I don't know, have you studied the people in all these hotels that isn't open to the public? Which the hotels, first point, get £4,500 a month from the Home Office, which is the taxpayers' money. Look at most of the asylum seekers. They're all healthy males in their 20s and 30s.
Okay.
There's something rather. They're milking the whole, truthfully and honestly, they're milking the whole system.
Okay, Robert, I've got to leave it there only because of time, but you got your views across. Again, we're talking about the backlog, and I think it's something that we're going to carry on talking because it's getting bigger and bigger.
It's getting bigger, but don't we need to make it clear to these countries where they come from that actually it's not a sort of utopian existence here? And I think they come here because they're sold a pup.
I just think
very briefly, because I've got to go.
Yeah,
We've got seconds.
I mean, you know, if you want to blame anyone for, if you do subscribe to the "we should send them back" idea, then blame Nigel Farage.
Okay.
Because after Brexit, we were not allowed to send people back.
All right, I've had to give you both your say there. Thank you all for your calls on that. After a break, we're going to be asking: is it time to scrap GCSEs? It's results day and top exam grades have fallen this year, so is there really any point in GCSEs? Then we've got the trending topics, including Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who inadvertently broke the MP's code of conduct over not declaring his wife's interest in childcare company. And should the government cut council tax for those who live near new builds? 50 MPs are calling for that to compensate residents. What do you think of that? Give us a call. 0207 862 2222 is the number you need. We'll speak to you after the break. Not a place I've ever been to. Either of you been to Hamilton, Bermuda?
No. It's a tax place, isn't it?
Is it?
I believe so, yeah.
Is it?
I think
Apparently it's really expensive because you can't really make anything there or grow anything. So literally everything you're getting is flown in. So that's why it's really expensive.
Yeah.
Welcome. If you just joined us, journalist Ava Santino, lawyer Nick Freeman are still with me. And here's a reminder of what's coming up on the show. In a moment, is it time to scrap GCSEs? It's GCSEs results day, but the top grades this year have fallen from last year. And students are being told that they're worth 1 million times more than their results. So should we get rid of them? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need to get your calls in. Then we'll take a look at what everybody's talking about online, including Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, who's presumed dead in a plane crash that happened yesterday near Moscow. I can also tell you he was presumed dead in 2019 in another airplane crash, so we'll have a closer look at that. And should the government cut council tax in a new build areas? Now, the thinking behind this comes from 50 MPs who are calling for that to happen. They feel that those who live near new developments should have their council tax, but in order so that they don't object to those new developments being built. Do you agree with that? Is that a bit too much like a bribe? You can call us 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Calls from landlines may cost up to 16 pence per minute, plus any call setup fees, and calls from mobiles may cost considerably more. Send us a message, head over to Facebook, Twitter, search for Jerry Movine on 5, and you can use the hashtag Alexis Conran. Now, your calls on whether it's time to scrap GCSEs. 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need to give us a call. It is GCSE results day, with many pupils across the country opening up their exam grades. Unfortunately, the number of top grades in exams has fallen from last year, but it is still higher than pre-pandemic levels. Students who received all 9s have halved from last year to only 1,150. And the number of students getting at least a passing C grade has fallen from 73% down to 68%. Now, this means that tens of thousands of teenagers are having to rethink their future options or face resits. So are GCSEs really useful? Or do we need to rethink them? Now, I've got to declare interest there. I was there at 9 o'clock this morning with my daughter at her school, picking up the piece of paper. She did well. Congratulations. She's very, very happy. We're all very happy. We're relieved. But I have to say, having followed this quite closely, it's been hugely frustrating to have to explain to my daughter that, you know, all that hard work you did, well, they've kind of decided that they're going to reduce the amount of top grades because they need to essentially do balancing the books and bring it down to pre-pandemic levels, et cetera, et cetera. So if the grades are so arbitrary that this year, we can't dish out too many 9s, or these are A stars or whatever they're called now, do the grades have any meaning, Ava, from now on?
Well, I think there's a multitude of unfairness associated with GCSEs. I mean, if you look at what's gone on for the past 13 years in this country, you've had education, the budget has been decimated by the Conservatives. I mean, if you look at classrooms up and down the country now, you're going to see pupils, up to 35 pupils in one class. No teaching assistant. It means that if you are someone who might have learning difficulties, you're going to fall by the wayside. And the attainment gap now between private schools and state schools is so wide and so vast. You know, you're twice as likely, so this is A-levels, but twice as likely to get an A star or A at a private school than a state school. And I just find that shameful. I just think that that's absolutely disgusting. Why are we allowing some pupils in the south to do twice as well as pupils in the north? It's just obscene.
Nick, no? Do you think the grading system needs to be revisited? I mean, it does. I mean, part of the obscene that Ava's mentioning
it's a different argument, that is.
Well, perhaps,
it's a different argument.
But if you have a student giving the same exact paper one year versus another year, you can get two different grades. That can't be right.
No. Well, first of all, I think the grading system's wrong. And what we need to know is it doesn't matter how many marks you get. What we want is... The point is education and evaluation. That's the point of GCSEs. So what we need to know as an employer is we want the top 5% or 10% to get A stars or A's and work it out that way so that a prospective employer can look at a grade and know that actually I've got the very brightest or the mid-range brightest or not so bright, so that those grades actually become meaningful. So if you give, I don't know, 30%, for example, grade A's, it doesn't mean anything to a prospective employer. And it's somebody who wants the best. How do you identify that? So for me, I would say there should be a percentage, and we can agree what that percentage is, 5-10% A's, and work your way down so we know what actually an A is. And I think what these GCSE results have done is they've actually brought people back to reality. And they've actually shown people, look, there's no point in living in a fool's paradise. This is actually the grade that at the moment reflects where you are. And if you're slightly disappointed, well, it's good to have that wake-up call because you've then got the opportunity to do something about it.
Yeah, but what doesn't play well with some students is they know very well that had they, for example, this year, had they written the exact same exam last year, they would have got a better grade. And that feels unfair.
And then there's an argument for that, you know, if you're a pupil doing exactly the same exam at a better school, then you would get a better grade. So I just think that, you know, life is unfair, education is unfair,
life's
and
unfair.
the whole thing is stupid.
Life's unfair.
You might as well learn it now.
A lovely message on a Thursday afternoon. Life's unfair, kids.
Well, is it unfair? I agree. Everyone should have an opportunity. And if you go to a state school or a private school, and if you really want to work there, you have that opportunity. And it's down to you at the end of the day how you apply yourself, how you take responsibility. Okay. You can't simply say, I'm at a state school and therefore I'm not going to do so well. It's up to you and how you want to perform, isn't it?
OK, let me pause you there and let's just catch up with friend of the show, maths teacher Bobby Siegel, who was with his pupils today who were getting their GCSE results. First up, Bobby, how's it been today?
Yes, it's been amazing seeing our students develop from year 7. Remember when they were small little children, and now some of them are towering above me at 6 foot and getting the results that they wanted. So it's been a great day to celebrate their success and hard work over the past 5 years.
And what have the results been like for you, Bobby? Have you seen an increase in maths as your subject? Have you seen an increase in better grades on maths? Or has maths also taken a bit of a hit in those top grades?
Yeah, I think like the nation, we've seen many of the results pull back towards the 2019 pre-pandemic standards. Obviously, last year, results did seem inflated. This year, they sort of moved back towards the long-term average. So individually, students might seem disappointed. But again, it's a question of, like, I think Nick's mentioning, is it relative, like a bell curve compared to the nation, or is it an absolute standard? I think this is where it brings a deeper question about what the purpose of exams are. Are they just like a benchmark onto the next stage, or is it to measure someone's absolute standard? And again, as an employer, you sort of want to know who's in the top 10%, who's in the top 20%, 30%, but also you want to know if someone is competent. And if it's just a bell curve, you can't necessarily tell if someone is competent or not.
OK, but then I guess you could argue that the top 20% of one year could vary quite significantly from the top 20% of another year or several years down the line.
Yes, and this is probably maybe one of the, I would say, failings of our current exam system. Because again, take maths, for example. Broadly speaking, we have, again, the bell curve, we have 1/3 of our students, roughly, across our school, across the nation, that get below a grade 4, which is deemed as like a good pass. So the old C grade. So they don't get a C grade, they get a D or below. So 1 in 3 children every year will leave 16 school thinking that they can't do maths. So obviously, if we're looking at a system that way, you've got this cutoff point. And if we're trying to make sure that young people are equipped for the real world, it's almost like a brutal cutoff point. And I know the school system is meant to equip people for the world, whether it's unfair or not. I think that 1/3 does seem a bit arbitrary.
Bobby, have you had to have any difficult discussions today with some of your students, perhaps ones that were predicted a 9 or an 8 or something sort of quite high, and have opened their envelopes today and seen something a little bit disappointing? Have you had to have any of those discussions? And how tricky is it for you as a teacher to have to sort of explain to people what's just gone on?
Yes, I definitely had a few of those challenging discussions where students were expecting certain grades, and in particular to meet sixth form entry requirements and not meeting it. So obviously, first thing is you try and call up the sixth form to see can they get in, but if not, is it a case of a remark or looking at alternative pathways, other sixth forms? And the reality is, it is a tough world, and you want your students to get the best possible opportunity. But I think in some ways, the students that don't quite make it, it means that they reset. And I think maybe it gives them the extra sort of like, yep, next year I'm going to work even harder. So maybe, yeah, it's not ideal, but I think sometimes students that don't quite make the mark, it maybe, I guess, gives them the impetus to work harder for the next couple of years.
OK. Bobby, as ever, thanks for giving us your time, and well done again to you and your students.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Bobby. I'm still sceptical about GCSEs and the way that we, not just the markings, but the way that we put everything on that 2-hour sort of window however long the exam is. Is that really the best way you think that we have of doing what Bobby said there, is just giving people a good idea of where they're at, giving them an assessment?
I mean, I don't really know how else you would mark it nationally. I don't know how on earth you would create some kind of bar, because, you know, as we saw during the pandemic, there were teachers who were grossly overestimating what their pupils
That is
could,
a problem,
you know.
yeah.
So I don't know, can you really trust people on the ground? You need to kind of have some sort of arbiter.
It evaluates a level, doesn't it? And it's quite harsh, it's quite brutal, but it's also quite truthful.
But then don't you have the problem that because schools, Ava, touching on what you said there, you had people, teachers overestimating the exam results, but then let's be honest about it, schools, and I know your sister's a teacher as well.
Yes.
Actually, you know, schools are very, very mark obsessed. They teach to the test, and that could be problematic, because if you're just teaching someone just so they can pass that 2-hour exam, perhaps they're not getting that full-rounded education that you could teach if the exam was just almost arbitrary at the end of it.
Yeah, but then where are you going to get the money to give someone a full-rounded, you know, critical thinking education?
That's the advantage
days?
of private education, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a huge advantage of private education. I mean, I have a son at Manchester Grammar. It's the most fantastic school because it focuses on academia, but everything else as well. So stand up and speak, address an audience, a whole host of activities. So, you know, if you have a privileged education, it does give you an advantage, without question.
Okay.
But as you say, that's life.
We've had so far, that's life. Life is tough. It's not so very positive messaging here on this Thursday afternoon. Look, some people are getting in touch on social media. Wayne on Twitter, or X, or whatever we're calling it this week, says the exam system is good, but its value is overstretched, as all it shows is how well you can recall information in a short period of time after studying prior. Mandy on Facebook says standardised tests are not an accurate reflection of what our children and young people are able to do, especially with undiagnosed conditions and lack of support. Lack of support, Ava's what you've been saying. Nick, as an employer, I mean, we had the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, not so long ago, saying that no one's ever going to ask you about your A-level results. She said this, there she is. She said, I hope she's not saying that to them. I hope she's not saying that to them there.
So
no, but she made, because we had the A-level exams last week. She said, look, no one's ever going to ask you about your A-levels. Which I'm not quite sure as an Education Secretary, on the day of A-levels, is the right comment to make.
I didn't think it was so bad, you know.
But
I thought it was okay. I kind of agree. No one's ever asked me.
But they're a hurdle, aren't they? So when you sit down, what goes on your CV? Your GCSEs, your A-levels, and what you've done and what you want to do.
So they do matter.
So they do matter.
Yeah.
All these exams get you to the next stage.
So what I was going to ask is, you as an employer, how much credence do you give to someone's GCSEs and A-levels?
Very little. I want someone, and I'm not trying to argue against myself, because the current grading system at the moment doesn't tell me very much.
Right.
You know, I know people who've got first-class honours degrees, and I don't regard them as being particularly bright, not representative of a first-class honours degree. And I'm not trying to be rude to people who've got those degrees. So what matters for me is obviously a level of education, a level of attainment, but I want to sit down with someone and look at them, read their body language, ask them questions, see how they deal with situations, put them on their feet in a mock trial, and just see how confident they are, have the ability to think on their feet, their knowledge, how much they care about it, their interpersonal skills, and I can go on and on. Yeah. So we're talking about the human aspect as well as the academic aspect.
Okay. I won't ask for your A-level
You can.
results.
You
no.
can.
I'm not going
Go on,
to.
do.
I'm not going to, because I don't want to answer about mine. We're going to move on now. After the break, it's going to be the trending topics, including a rather bizarre trend on TikTok. When I saw this, I couldn't quite believe it, but this is parents who are cracking eggs on their kids' heads. Medical experts are worried that this could hurt them and even spread germs. We'll see you after the break. No one can believe it upstairs. I think there's going to be a Stewart's inquiry on that one. But yes, a sloth can hold its breath underwater for 40 minutes because they reduce their heart rate by up to about a third. There we go. Welcome if you're just joining us. Ava and Nick are still with me. And in a moment, we're going to be asking you this. Should we cut council tax for those who live in new build areas? The idea being that you get a reduced council tax so you don't object to new housing being built in your area. Do we think that's a good idea, Nick?
Definitely. We've got a housing crisis. We need to incentivise people. If people are rewarded for it, they will support the project, and that's what we need.
OK. Well, look, that's Nick's opinion. I'm not quite sure Ava would agree with that, but we'll find out. But I want to hear what you have to say on that. Would you accept a reduction in your council tax, but you have no say in new builds around your area? What do you think? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need to let me know if you agree with that. Now, while you're dialing to speak to us, let's have a quick look at today's top trending topics. So, Nick, all over social media, it's trending in various different ways. Putin, Wagner, Prigozhin. What's happened?
It's a very good question.
It is a very good question.
He may have been killed in a plane crash. He may.
So let's explain. Prigozhin is the
leader of the Wagner Group.
The leader of the Wagner Group, which is a sort of effectively a private army.
2 months ago yesterday.
A strange figure. He used to be the sort of head of catering at the Kremlin.
Well, prior to that, he was a criminal.
And then has his own private army. 2 months ago, as you said, there was a sort of a mini coup, if you like.
Yeah, he took over a major Russian city,
yeah.
Marched on Moscow, humiliated Putin. They did a deal within 24 hours, and the deal was you leave the country and you'll be all right. So what we don't know is, we do know you don't cross Putin, but what we don't know here is, I mean, he was supposed to have died in a plane crash in 2019. It clearly didn't. Is this another scam? Is this a deal between Putin and him to make it look like I've gone and I'll spend the rest of my life quietly away with his multitude of disguises? Or is this actually Putin getting his revenge and sending a very strong lesson out? Do not ever cross me, because this is what will happen. So we don't know, and I don't know whether we'll ever find out, because obviously the plane was extremely incinerated. There's going to be no remains for identification purposes. 10 people were killed. All the leaders' right-hand people were on the plane. So I don't think we're ever going to get the real answer, but the suspicion is probably he was on the plane. But why I'm slightly in doubt is, shortly after this plane crash, there was another private jet also registered in his name that he travels on even more frequently, zigzagging across, which would tend to suggest it was taking some sort of avoidance technique. So I don't know whether that's part of the story, and I don't know whether we'll ever know. But it's an interesting one.
They knew about it pretty quick, though, didn't they? They knew about who was on that plane pretty quick and announced it.
Flight manifest.
Too quickly.
But the problem is you have sort of Russian media reporting it. I think they spent 30 seconds on it in their bulletin yesterday. So it was really nothing. and yet we don't really have an official line other than his name was on the plane.
And he was a hero, apparently. You know, that's the line that's being, you know, that there was just a spokesperson this morning, a former spokesperson, and he was saying that, you know, he'll be sorely missed.
Yes, so why would Putin go after someone who was a Russian hero?
But what was also interesting is just before it happened, Putin was looking at his watch, and bizarrely, he was looking at his wrong wrist.
Oh.
And it was like he was looking at his watch to see the time, as if he was expecting something to happen, but actually was looking at... He always wears his watch on one wrist, and he was looking at the wrong wrist.
Did you read that, or were you there?
No, I saw the picture. I saw the picture.
But I think, Nick,
I
think, Nick, you're right, that the chances of us knowing exactly what has happened on this occasion, I think, are quite slim. Ava, the word inadvertently is trending on Twitter, which is a bit odd, because... Why? What's it connected to?
Well, Rishi Sunak got a little bit confused, is the conclusion, because he forgot to mention during a liaison committee session last year, or earlier this year, sorry, that his wife had a financial interest in a child. Gosh, how do you even describe it? Child-minding company. I was going to say a child-rearing company. That's a very different business altogether. Child-minding
a childcare providing company.
Exactly. Yeah, so he forgot, and he's now been cleared by the Parliamentary Committee on Standards because he later wrote it down on a piece of paper and now has declared it as an interest. However, there's a lot of confusion because during the committee, his excuse for not naming it at the time is that he wasn't quite sure of where his wife puts her money. And, you know, she's very, very wealthy. Their family is actually wealthier than our monarchy. But that's so interesting, isn't it? Imagine sitting down at the dinner table, sharing a life with someone, and you don't know all of their financial interests.
Well, I can understand that, to be honest. I'm not sure. My point will be he's the Prime Minister. He's got form for this, hasn't he? And he's got a multitude of advisors. And you would think, particularly as he got caught last time, not declaring his tax interests in the right way, that the alarm bells would ring. And whatever happens, make sure we get it right next time. So
also, there was his green card, from what I remember, again, which everybody sort of found out, hang on a minute, in order to have a green card, you have to be a registered resident of the US. So how is the Chancellor at the time a resident of the US? This is particularly unsavoury because the government has commissioned some of these childcare companies, one of which is connected to the Prime Minister's wife, for government work, essentially sort of employed this company. So it doesn't look great, but it has been looked into, Ava, and they said, look, he inadvertently broke the ministerial code.
It's sort of like when, you know, Boris Johnson got ambushed by cake, or, you know, everything's sort of accidental. Or, but, you know, it actually reminds me of Owen Paterson. I don't know if you remember that a couple of years ago. That sort of kicked off all of the big resignations in the Tory party. But he was, you know, supposedly lobbying for healthcare firms, you know, the healthcare firm Randox, while having this undeclared interest in it. I mean, what's going on?
Well,
big money to lobby for.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. That's why inadvertently is trending on Twitter. Now, this caught my eye a couple of days ago, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Have a look at this. There's a trend on TikTok where parents are cracking eggs on toddlers' heads. Have a look.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Hey! That was very nice. That wasn't very nice. Can I do it to you?
Now, I can tell you that there are thousands of videos there with different reactions. Now, a lot of people have been getting involved, medical professionals saying, look, it's actually quite hard to crack an egg. I mean, I've got some eggs here. If either of you want to have a little go, we've got some. I mean, how would you feel if I just cracked one
Are they
of these?
free range?
Yes, don't worry. I mean, that's quite... I don't want it to crack now because we've got half the show left. But it's quite hard. But basically, your parents are setting up cameras. You know how they go like, oh, I'm making brownies with the kids. The kids are there looking at the bowl, and then when it comes to the eggs, they just whack it on the kid's forehead and crack, and they're all giggling.
I'm sad watching it. I'm really
sick.
sad for the
It's
children.
sick, and it's criminal.
Is it criminal?
It's criminal.
Oh,
it's
here
an
we
assault.
go.
It's a common assault. It's a common assault. They're not allowed to do that. I mean, you know, what lesson are they teaching the kids, apart from anything else? But to actually, you're not allowed to hit your kids. You're damaging them. And it's completely wrong. It is criminal, and it should stop immediately.
There you go. There's another one.
It should stop immediately. And you're teaching kids, actually, that level of behaviour is acceptable. No wonder people go around throwing eggs at prime ministers and things.
But also you're teaching sort of kids that not to trust you. Because mostly it's like, let's we're going to put, here's another one. Look, bam, on the head. And a lot of the kids don't quite know what to make of it. I'm not quite sure.
It's really sad. It's sort of like showing your child that, like, during quality time, you might get a whack out of nowhere.
Yeah,
I just think that's
and all that so you can put it on social media.
Yeah, well, I think there should be some kind of regulation about putting children on social media because it's totally bizarre to me.
In general, but I'm not surprised.
It's common assault.
It's common assault.
It's a common assault.
I've put the eggs away for now. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to try it. Now, look, we're going to move on. Your calls on this. Whether councils should cut their tax, the council tax, in new build areas. 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need to let us know what you think. Now, around 50 MPs are calling for those who live in areas where new homes are being built to get their council tax cut. The Conservative Growth Group are hoping that council tax cuts would encourage people to back house building culture and new housing projects. The focus, of course, is to fulfil the government's target of building 1 million new homes by next year. And the group are calling to reform the planning process to make it easier to build infrastructure to support new homes. Now, MPs are yet to sign off on the plans on this new homes bonus, and more details are yet to be released this autumn. But is it even a good idea? Nick, you thought it was a good idea. Ava, do you agree? I mean, does it feel a bit like a bribe?
I'm just exhausted reading this. It's just so tiresome. I mean, you know, we do a lot about housing. A lot of my journalism is around housing and supply and demand. And, you know, shock, there is not enough supply and there is a hell of a lot of demand at the moment. And, you know, what is just absolutely fascinating to me is that someone thinks it's their God-given right to have bought a property in the 70s. That property is appreciated in value and therefore they don't want anyone else to build and they don't want anyone else moving in, because that might have an effect or a depreciation in value for their own home. I just think it's so incredibly selfish. I just can't quite wrap my head around it.
I'm not sure that's the reason, is it?
What would be the reason?
Well, OK. There's development going for HS2 near in Cheshire. And a friend of mine who has a house in a very nice area, the sort of area you're talking about, he said, we've been told there will be 500 lorries per day going along this quiet residential road, taking equipment backwards and forward. Now, that is pretty significant disruption. It's not about... Because ultimately the property will be worth more money when HS2 is there in 7 years or 9 years or whenever it is. But they are entitled, are they not, to be compensated for that level of disruption? You buy a house, it's quiet. That's obviously the tranquility is something that's quite important. So this is serious disruption. And unfortunately, there often is serious disruption with new builds. And the government need to do something to stimulate the housing crisis. Otherwise, it's just going to remain. They need to build about 300,000 houses a year, and they're not doing so. So I don't know where the money's going to come from, because no one but in principle, I think it's a good idea.
And Nick's saying that see it as a form of compensation.
Yeah, but can I talk about this disruption that you're talking about? Because, you know, what disruption actually is and what it looks like for under 35-year-olds at the moment is the fact that they're allowed to take out a tenancy somewhere, they pay an extortionate amount of rent, and then they're kicked out at the end of that year and they've got to uproot their entire life. A lot of people now are living in tiny, especially in cities, tiny little apartments, tiny little flats. They're basically giving away half of their salary, if they're lucky, sometimes more, to a landlord who doesn't care if they live or die. And, you know, I'm sorry, I don't really care if you've bought a nice home and you're going to have a little lorry walk going outside your house. I don't care.
It's not a little lorry, it's 500 big lorries on a daily basis.
I would take 500 lorries outside a house that I own rather than having to, you know, pick up and rent somewhere else.
OK, I want to hear from you if you agree with Ava or with Nick. Should people get a reduction in their council tax for inconvenience of building new infrastructure, or, as we've been hearing from the MPs, for their commitment to allow new planning to go ahead in the local area? Let me know what you think. 0207 862 2222 is the number you need. Annie on Facebook has got in touch. She says, I can't see logic as new builds bring increased pressure on areas for local service, which are paid for by council tax. But then you're going to have more people paying council tax, so you kind of balance that. But thank you for that. Phil on Twitter says, if you can afford $250,000 for a new home, you can afford council tax. Nick, the first thing that sprung into my mind, because it did sound a bit like a bribe to me.
It is. It's an incentive.
It's an incentive, but how do you enforce it? So let's say I take a reduction in my council tax. How do they get a commitment from me that when something comes through my post saying we're going to build 50 flats across the road from you, I'll go, well, no, sorry, I reject that.
It's not a legally binding contract.
Right,
You're absolutely
okay.
right. So what they're trying to do is it's a sweetener. And they're trying to say, look, we're going to help your area, and in order for us to help you, we'd like to offer this. And that's as far as it goes. And you may be right. They may take the money and they may still object. You don't know, do you? The money surely will be contingent on the development taking place. They're not going to give the money until the development starts. So if the development doesn't get through,
right,
there's no reduction in council tax.
I mean, as we mentioned earlier,
that will be the safeguard.
As we mentioned earlier, we don't have all the details yet, but the idea... Is that the biggest... Because I know, Ava, you've done a lot of journalism around new builds and housing. Is the main reason that we are in this mess the fact that people, everywhere you try and put new housing, people object? They just don't want it.
Yeah, I mean, partly that. I think there's a huge supply issue, and there's also this big problem that when you do build somewhere, those houses are allowed to be sold to buy-to-let landlords, and then they just go back onto the rental market. So it means that first-time buyers aren't buying and growing up into, in homes in small villages. I just think that it's really kind of a big conservative problem. I think because especially these Tory MPs, they're going to be fighting elections next year, and a lot of those constituents won't want new homes in their backyard, right? So this is kind of like their last swing, their last grab at picking up a few extra votes to keep their constituents happy. OK, let's find out what people are saying at home. Steve in East Sussex has called. Steve, good afternoon. What do you think? Would you take a council tax cut, but then you can't object to any new developments in your area?
No, I wouldn't accept the actual council tax cut. It is, sooner or later, we're going to run out of land, aren't we? Where do you draw the line on building houses? They keep on saying we should be building this amount of houses, but we do need animals and we do need other produce to live on.
OK, but what if it's not a development? What if it's like Nick was saying, you're going to have a major bit of infrastructure, a new road, something like that, that's going to majorly inconvenience where you live? Would you take a tax cut then? Council tax cut?
No, well, not at the moment. We've got an estate at the moment that has been refused.
Okay.
The reason being is the road itself has had so many accidents on it that they're now wanting to put another junction about 500 metres down the road and build another 15 houses.
OK.
That's on a bend, on a hill, on a very fast road.
OK, Steve, I've got to leave it there, only because I've run out of time. Are we too full to build houses, Ava?
Oh, no, don't be ridiculous. There's just a lot of land that people are overprotective of, that's all.
OK, Nick?
I love free space. I think it's a balance, and we need to find that. We need to be very careful, don't we? We need to be careful.
OK, but then also you both agree that we need to build a whole more new houses?
Yeah, there's plenty of brownfield sites as well that can be built on, plenty.
OK.
But we also need to preserve our beautiful countryside.
I'm sure we will be coming back to housing again. Well, look, that's it for today. Thank you so much to Ava and Nick. Dawn is back stepping in for Jeremy tomorrow at 9:15. Have a wonderful afternoon. I'll see you at the same time tomorrow. Stay safe.